Hey there, boys and girls, I've got something you'll adore. It's new and fun and oh so cool, no need to clutch your pearls. Join Father Malone and his pal HB on a journey to Sunshine Cab. It's called Night, Mr. Walters, and costs $0 guaranteed to make you smile. Hey!
Weird Way Media.
Welcome back to Midnight Viewing, the horror anthology podcast. I am Father Malone, and with me today on a very special bonus episode, joining us all the way from the Sunshine Cab Company, the host, co-host, owner of Night, Mr. Walters, Mr. HP. Thank you for joining us, HP.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Father Malone. Always great to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Now, on these bonus episodes, we like to shake things up a little bit. We tend to focus on singular episodes of horror anthology television, but we're going to shake things up even more here because we're taking our first look at a cinematic horror anthology, this being from 1985, Stephen King's Cat's Eye.
Stephen King, your favorite novelist and master of modern horror, has written his first motion picture screenplay. It combines all the elements of his creative imagination. Lovable pets, classic cars, quiet evenings, favorite films.
Kill the son of a...
Good idea.
Adorable kids.
Help me! It's after me!
And of course, a monster or two. Experience a series of electrifying adventures as seen through Stephen King's Cat's Eye.
Where's your sense of humor?
Stephen King's Cat's Eye.
Cat's Eye from 1985. This was an original screenplay by Stephen King, although two of the stories here are adapted. It's always interesting when they just say original screenplay by, like they said that was for Creepshow as well. And yet at least one of those stories was based on a previously published material. Nevertheless, it was directed by Mr. Louis Teague. If you didn't know it, you certainly will. Within moments, it was definitely produced by Dino De Laurentiis. Also, side notes, music by Alan Silvestri. Let me give you a quick rundown of some of the major players of the cast here. James Woods is in this movie. Kenneth McMillan, Robert Hayes. This is his only other role from Airplane. So sad. Candy Clark is in this. James Naughton. And, of course, our girl, Drew Barrymore. HP, you begged to be on the show when you heard I was doing Cat's Eye because you kept telling me this is your favorite horror anthology at the time. Explain why you think that in your words, that this is the pinnacle of horror anthologies.
Well, yeah. Look, you've got your creep shows, you've got your Tales from the Crypt, you've got your Tales from the Dark Side, the movie. This one, this one is kind of dear to my heart because it sort of comes out of that whole wave of sort of PG-13 horror movies around that time. Movies like Gremlins, Poltergeist was obviously a lot earlier, but it shares some of the sort of suburban setting at times of that movie. But the look and feel of it kind of, it feels like it came out of that wave of horror movies. And this might have actually been, Tales from the Dark Side of the movie came out in 1990, but this feels like the last of that wave of kind of lighter horror movies with a bit of an edge. You know what I mean? There's things in this movie. The cat, of course, is very much something that kids can get behind, and it's a very, nice image. But there's an edge to this movie, particularly when we get to the final story involving the troll. But yeah, no, I hadn't seen this movie in full in decades, literally. I think the last time I saw it was on cable, in fact. So it was really nice to get back and rewatch this because I hadn't seen it in so long.
Was that also the first place you saw it? Was it on cable? Was it a rental? Did you see it theatrically?
I didn't see it in the movies because, frankly, at that time, I wasn't someone who sought out horror movies. If they were on cable, like this movie, I would watch them. So yeah, this was definitely, because it was, at that time, this movie was on a loop with all the other evergreen movies around that time. So I no doubt I saw it on HBO or one of those channels.
As for me, I was there on April the 12th, 1985, first day, first row. Showcase Cinemas, Revere, Massachusetts, seeing Cat's Eye. When horror movies aren't rated R, the horror community tends to cluck its tongue and say how it's not hardcore enough. But I will also say that 12-year-old me was fucking stoked that this movie was PG-13 and I was going to buy a ticket and walk in. And you know what? The fact that this movie doesn't have the requisite number of fucks in order to get to the R rating diminishes nothing. A lot of this movie is nightmare fuel, particularly when you make it available to children. It ends up being a gateway drug of horror, I think.
Unquestionably, I'm glad you said that because I'm rewatching this. And like I said, it being a PG-13 movie, like you said, it carried a certain taint for horror fans at that time. But I agree with you as I'm rewatching this. There's a lot of awful things that happen in this movie. There's a lot of things that the more you think about them, the more horrible they become in your mind. So I was surprised, actually, how affected I was even after all this time. It's a pretty heavy movie, even though I was familiar with the original stories that, as you said, was it Night Shift? Was that the collection that these came from?
Both, yeah. The two stories that are previously published were both from his short story collection, Night Shift. And that the final tale is an original for the movie, concocted for Dino De Laurentiis in his mad dash to be the ultimate overseer of his new Shirley Temple, Drew Barrymore's career. As far as I'm concerned, in my humble opinion, all the anthology series and films in the 1980s are all ripples in the pond by the stone, put there by the stone that is Creepshow. And Dino, no slouch, I think recognized, or no, you know what? I was about to say that he recognized that Creepshow was a hit and wanted to do that himself, but that is actually not the case. What had happened was Dino recognized that Stephen King was a hot commodity and attempted to buy every property of his that he could get his hands on and managed to get Firestarter. So Firestarter gets made and Drew Barrymore gets cast in it. She blows up in E.T. Dino De Laurentiis recognizes that he's got a fucking gold mine here in both Stephen King and Drew Barrymore and approaches Stephen King to do a film specifically for Drew Barrymore, a vehicle for Drew Barrymore. And Stephen King says, well, I have these stories. And now I'm paraphrasing Stephen King, who I'm sure is paraphrasing Dino De Laurentiis, but he says, Dino De Laurentiis read a few of the stories and came back and he said, Stevie, these stories, they are horrible, but they are funny. Maybe we can put a few together. And at that point, Stephen King said, I don't know if you saw a movie I just did called Creepshow where we did exactly that. So then he concocted the final story, the troll and the little girl. He had already been working on the idea, evidently. It was supposed to be about a little boy being menaced by a tiny troll. And after Dino's imploring that he employ Drew Barrymore, it became a girl. And then he just adapted two of his better stories from Night Shift And now, interestingly, those two stories had already been optioned. If you watch this movie to the very, very final credit, you will see produced by or co-produced by Milton Subotsky, who had purchased as many of Stephen King's properties as he could get. He's the low-key American via England Dino De Laurentiis. He was, of course, the producer for Amicus Productions, that produced all of the great anthology films of the 1970s. So I believe he had to receive a credit and they paid him off. But Dino De Laurentiis, being nothing if not magnanimous, stuck his credit at the very end of as you're getting up and the lights are coming up, it says co-produced by Milton Subotsky. It's kind of a real slap in the face. Or la cara, I think Dino might call it.
Sure. Well, and it's the other thing, another thing that I was reminded of as I was watching this is in 1985, Stephen King was really no pun intended, the king of mass market horror. You couldn't go to the supermarket without seeing a million of he was publishing books at such a rapid rate, and they were always popular. They were always on the bestseller list, and they were getting adapted at a very fast rate. Not to say that the quality was always top notch. Of course, anyone who knows his filmography will agree, but it just reminded me of how omnipresent Stephen King was in culture at that time. He was everywhere. His books were everywhere, and it felt like he was really like the leader in mass market horror.
Mass market horror, he was everywhere. Stephen King was omnipresent in 1985 because not only could you not turn around without tripping over a Stephen King novel or new paperback that had come out, but there were tons of movie adaptations. At this point, it was frenzy. It was like blood in the water for Stephen King properties. And he was starting to make inroads in television. Not to mention, he kept trying to sell us an American Express card.
Do you know me? It's frightening how many novels of suspense I've written. But still, when I'm not recognized, it just kills me. So instead of saying I wrote Carrie, I carry the American Express card. Without it, isn't life a little scary?
To apply for the card, look for an application and take one.
The American Express card.
Don't leave home without it.
HB, I was thinking about this myself today about Stephen King. I don't remember a time where Stephen King wasn't a thing, but I also remember a time when he was an up-and-comer. I remember the adults in my life in the late 70s talking about Stephen King in hushed tones. By then, I think if you had any exposure to him in the mass media, it was probably because Carrie was turned into a film by Brian De Palma, which turned out to be a huge success. But I remember those days, and I remember people talking about Stephen King and, they're making The Shining, they're making Salem's Lot. But it's crazy to think that there was a time when he wasn't everywhere, because even to this day, he's still everywhere, really.
He is. And I remember as a kid, it was so easy to get caught up on his work because you could just go into any old used bookstore and you would go to the horror section and there would be 5-6 shelves worth of Stephen King. There'd be 8 copies of Pet Sematary, 3 copies of Salem's Lot, and you could get them. What I did was I got them super cheap. You just get these paperbacks that were dog-eared and they'd been read, pretty heavily. And that's how I sort of got into Stephen King, was I just got into him on the cheap. I would just go to the used bookstore and load up. But my first experience, for me, I agree. I don't remember a time when he wasn't embedded in pop culture at large. I can't remember when he was up and coming, but I do remember my first sort of experience with him was the movie Creepshow being on cable, because it was so I was a comic book guy and I still am. And that is a comic book in film form. It was an EC comic, of course. I don't have to tell you this, but that movie had such a magnetic attraction to me. I remember seeing the previews for it and seeing, Ted Danson buried up to his head on the beach with Leslie Nielsen menacing him. And those stories were so compelling and so cool. I didn't know EC Comics at the time, but there was something so sort of adult yet kid-like, because they were comic books, essentially, that was that first time I was really aware of Stephen King. And it was just from there, it was just get all of his books, read everything I could about him. And it was, but I can't ever, it's like David Bowie. I can't remember a time when I didn't know of David Bowie and seeing him on MTV. I never remember Stephen King not being around.
You mentioned Creepshow. And of course, I think to me, Creepshow was probably my favorite movie of all time. I say it's Dawn of the Dead when pushed, but I know I will watch Creepshow more and have watched Creepshow more than any other film. It's one of those movies that I am completely burned into my retina at this point. One thing that really works in Creepshow is there's a wraparound story but there isn't a wraparound story. It starts and ends with a parent punishing their child for reading this comic book. The comic book is forbidden, which, for children of the 1950s reading EC Comics, that was a familiar scene for them. But other than that, what we're given is the tale of the comic book as it is buffeted around by the wind in a storm outside as it is waiting for trash day. And every time the comic book flips open to a page, there we are, and here's the story. So I want to ask you, before we delve into Cat's Eye, how important do you think a wraparound story is?
Well, I would like to say, I feel like it should be important, but I also at the same time, I feel like in most anthology films that I've seen, they just tend to be kind of a thin veneer with which to kind of hang the rest of the story on. As we'll see, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but I would say that's one of the weakest parts of Cat's Eye. There's really the wraparound is really just kind of a vehicle to get this cat from place to place where he is tangential to most of these adventures. With Creepshow, I didn't mind it because I don't know, it was the way it's depicted, because every time you go to the wraparound, you remember it goes to kind of rotoscoped animation. And like you said, it gets buffeted by the wind and it's on the ground and whatever. I thought that to me that was perfect because I didn't need some intricate story with which to hang the rest of the episodic pieces together. So I guess in a sense, I'm kind of going against what I just said, which is I feel like it should be important, but at the end of the day, I don't necessarily care about it as long as it's the sum of its parts is there. As long as the episodic pieces work, I don't really care as much about the wraparound. Well, how do you feel? Would you rather something be like, would you rather that the wraparound be almost like an extra story in and of itself?
Our friends over at Film Foundation had me on recently talking about horror anthologies in general. And when that question was posed to me, my answer was a wraparound segment is either the most important part of the horror anthology or the least, and both are equally acceptable. Creepshow is supposed to be a comic book come to life. What more do I need than the comic book flipping open to a page and taking me with it? It's all I need. In fact, the fact that they have any sort of connective tissue out on the street where the comic book we're shown its environment only adds to the loneliness of that situation, only like makes you more of that kid reading that comic book on his own. That isn't to say that something as simple as like Vault of Horror, we all got off on the wrong elevator and now we're telling each other stories like that have no connective tissue at all. It's just people telling each other a story and then they're in hell. That's the famous Amicus solution to wraparounds. I think I honestly don't care. I would like it tied in. I would like it to become part of the story, but I also don't want the whole movie to hang on it being clever by doing that.
I don't care as long as, like I say, Creepshow works beautifully because it's all about the comic book. But when you have your Vault of Horror solution, like you said, where they're telling each other these stories as just a vehicle to get to the good stuff, that's, it kind of calls attention to the fact that it's just, you have to get from A to B. So that's the convenient solution. But I'm trying to think of an example where it is very important and I can't.
Well, I would say I'm not a fan of this movie, which is probably why I didn't bring it up, but Trick or Treat manages to weave all of their anthological stories together and have the connective tissue pay off in the finale. Like that become that character who we've seen to be just like a host introducing the tales actually becomes the focus of the tales. We realize that the whole thing has been about them all along. So I think it can be done, but the fact that there are literally dozens of anthology films that I would point to that are better than that film that don't have such a clever wraparound story, means ultimately the wraparound is meaningless. I read a lot. I went back and read a lot of the reviews of Cat's Eye when it came out in 1985. And
I did too, actually. Yeah.
a common complaint seemed to me that they kept saying that these stories aren't related, which made me wonder if they had ever seen an anthology before or ever watched The Twilight Zone from week to week. Like, wait, this isn't what happened last week. Where's Burgess Meredith?
Yeah, I don't know where they would get that complaint. I think because in this movie, like, we're talking about the wraparound, and really the wraparound in this movie is essentially the cat trying to fulfill its destiny and protecting the girl at the end. But I didn't really care about it. And I've been so sort of immersed in anthologies my whole life, everything from, like you said, Twilight Zone to eventually EC Comics and things like that. Maybe I'm just more conditioned to understanding that they don't have to be connected. There may be a thematic connection, thin at best sometimes, but I don't really care. Like, I don't know what they were expecting. Maybe all the stories they were hoping that they'd all take place in New York and they'd have, I don't know. I think that's kind of an unfounded criticism personally.
I think as viewers, the more sophisticated viewership became over the years, the less necessary a wraparound becomes. Because if you look from the original Twilight Zone to Night Gallery to the reboot of the Twilight Zone in 85, you can see Rod Serling is very, very necessary for the original Twilight Zone. He seems a lot less so. It seems more nostalgic when we get to Night Gallery. By the time we get to 1985, listen, Rod's dead at this point, but they choose not to have an on-screen narrator. In fact, they have a sometime narrator. They've decided that some of these stories don't need narration at all, and that's the truth about any of them. So as far as the presentation goes, you're right. Like, as a viewer, we're now used to all of these shows having no connective tissue whatsoever. So it really becomes less important. So I don't understand why a Gene Siskel is complaining that these stories are unrelated. And I'm on the side of Roger Ebert for once, who's just like, it's an anthology film. Like, that's what it does. Like, what is the connective tissue of the previous year's Twilight Zone movie other than Twilight Zone? Kick the Can and Nightmare at 20,000 Feet aren't exactly thematically matching.
But what is nice to as a viewer is really what you're describing. There has to be some umbrella under which all of these stories sort of fall. It doesn't have to be some definitive connection, but when you're dealing with the Twilight Zone, for example, you know that the umbrella is the sort of Rod Serling vision for this, Twilight Zone universe, for lack of a better term. You know what you're in for, more or less. There'll be some humor, there'll maybe be some science fiction, there'll be some fantastical elements, maybe somebody getting what they deserve, maybe somebody getting what they never thought they needed. But you go into it knowing that it's the Twilight Zone brand, if you will. And when you come into Cat's Eye, you know that this is a Stephen King grouping of stories. So if you know Stephen King, you know more or less what to expect, right? So without even putting aside the connective bits, the wraparound and whatever, an anthology still should have an umbrella thematically under which you kind of know what to expect, I guess.
When it comes to wraparound segments, HP, the fact is this one comes close to being the greatest wraparound sequence of all time. He almost pulls off a neat trick of having this potentially just incidental character. He managed to weave it through each of the stories almost. It ends up being an incidental appearance in each of these stories where it doesn't really matter. It only really matters in Critters Incorporated, the first story. Mm-hmm. And it's only tangentially in the second one. But I liked following this cat on its journey. And I liked that it was central to the final tale to be told.
I agree. And it helps that, I'm sure there were probably, a bunch of cats that they had acting in this movie, but I got to hand it to the cat wrangler. They got some great cats and great performers. By the end of the movie, you are so pulling for that cat to save the day. You've seen that cat through all this awfulness, the things that happen to it, but it's such a great performer. Even at the beginning when it's getting chased by Cujo, which I know we'll get to it.
We'll get to
but,
that.
But it helps that, I mean, obviously animals are famously awful to deal with at making a movie, directing them. But I have to say, like, having a great presence like that cat, however many they had to get the job done, really, really went a long way towards making that wraparound work, I think.
That cat is not credited in the credits of this movie. That's a goddamn shame. Someone should retroactively fix that. I think I agree with you. There are a few animal performers that really piqued my interest, and this one definitely does. He's great. She's great. Which one is it? I don't know. There's no credit. God damn you. And God bless the animal wrangler. They did a great job. I will say there are a few moments in this film which proved to be harrowing, and it made me fear for that cat. We'll get to it in the story itself, but I cannot, honestly, HP, I cannot tell if it's a visual effect or if they just have a cat nearly being hit by cars. There are two shots, and we'll get to them. Well, we'll get to that. Anyway, let's start this show, shall we? This story begins, Cat's Eye begins, with the lovely lilting tones of Alan Silvestri. Alan Silvestri doing his work here, HB. What do you think of his score here?
His score is interesting. Anyone who's a fan of Back to the Future and other movies, you can't help but be an Alan Silvestri fan. His work is so distinctive and memorable and recognizable. But in this movie, as I was watching this and I realized that it was Alan Silvestri, it surprised me because I had no memory. This was a long time ago when I saw it, but I had no memory of him doing the score. And initially, I have to say, as I'm listening to it, it almost felt a little bit kind of beholden to what, like John Carpenter. It's very electronic in places and kind of very strident and rhythmic. And it was interesting. But then again, if I think about his sort of work over time, like I could point to a movie like Fandango, which he did the score for that as well. It's not as well known because there's a lot of he did the orchestral bits and the bits that aren't like actual songs from that period it's Alan Silvestri. There's a sequence in that where Kevin Costner's character is having a dream about the girl that he left behind, and his Silvestri's score behind it's electronic. And it's very ambient, and it really captures a very specific mood, and I always loved it. So that sort of taught me that, yes, there's Alan Silvestri who has these triumphant yet comedic scores from movies like Back to the Future, but in this, I think he's proven that, he's writing in the time period, right? It's the 80s. So that's going to be the style that he's writing in. But I liked it. I thought it was good. It's a little bit over the top at times, but the movie itself is over the top at times. So I really liked it.
I think there are two sort of themes going on here, right? There's the horror theme, and then there's the typical Alan Silvestri triumphant theme. The horror theme is the more out there electronica stuff that you're talking about, the sort of Which also reminds me of the score for Silver Bullet for some reason. The triumphant theme, General is the name of the cat. It sounds to me like it's a ripoff, a bargain basement synthesizer ripoff of the Back to the Future theme. But this movie actually beats Back to the Future to the theaters.
I agree. I mean, you look at any composer that has any long body of work, and you're going to hear echoes of what they've done in various movies. You can't get around that. I mean, John Williams, as wonderful as he is, he has some sort of motifs that are his stock in trade. Alan Silvestri is no different, and I think that's what you're kind of driving at.
Well, I will say, in John Williams' defense, who needs no defending from me? And if I've noticed people beating up on him recently. They can go fuck themselves. But I will say that for the sheer volume of work produced by Williams, there are very few times where I can point and go, this sounds like that. I mean, there's an overall John Williams thing. You go, oh, that's a John Williams score. But there are very few times where I can go, well, the Harry Potter theme is just the Tinker Toy version of the Witches of Eastwick theme, because that one's true. But like, that's a rarity. But anyway, I think Silvestri's doing great work here. So, HP, here's the wraparound. It's begun. Are you ready? We're following a cat. Who is this cat? Where's he come from? I don't know. You don't know. But I do know that we're suddenly going to be treated to a ton of shout outs to Stephen King in a movie by Stephen King, in a script by Stephen King. Because as you mentioned earlier, the cat is being menaced by a giant Saint Bernard that is foaming at the mouth. A clear nod to Cujo. This is Cujo, right? And then both Cujo and the cat are nearly collided or run over by a 1958 Plymouth Fury with a red body and a white top, right? Which not only is Christine, and clearly if you're a fan of King, you know that this is outrageously calling out Stephen King, all of these references, but on the bumper of the fucking car, they have the bumper sticker that was being sold. I remember seeing it in stores and seeing it on cars, the saying, I am Christine. Like, did you really need to hit the nail on the head so fucking hard there?
Yeah, I groaned when I saw that, because if it had just been the car almost hitting the dogs and kind of, the guy shaking his fist, that would have been fine. And I would have said, oh, that's kind of a nice little callback. But then to focus on those bumper stickers on the car was a little too much, I thought, too.
And what I thought was too much was then the cat runs between the legs of this teenage girl covered in blood in a prom dress. And then in the next scene, the cat is running down this hallway with this horizontal or octagonal pattern on the floor, being chased by a guy with an axe. And then, no, it's really silly. Anyway, so enough of Stephen King calling out to Stephen King. And here's the thing. I read the script this morning, HP, and the references are in there. So he actually put it in. I thought this was like Louis Teague. Growing up, I thought this was Louis Teague going like, hey there, Stephen King, look at me. I got you, pal. But no, this is Stephen King telling the director, put in these references to me.
Well, in fairness, I think
they're far from the last, because we're going to keep seeing a lot of King references here.
Yeah. And in fairness, Louis Teague did direct Cujo. So, I give the man full credit for doing that, because he directed that movie. But yeah, it was a lot. Yeah.
So the cat it eludes Cujo. It ends up running through a thing. And here's where we get our first look at our girl.
And again, this is another thing that I sort of, that eluded me the last time I saw this movie. And that, so I get what you're saying about the wraparound, and it's important, but like, I have to say, I still don't get all of these hallucinations that the cat is having, these visions of the girl. And it's always Drew Barrymore saying, help me, you have to find this thing, or whatever she says. And the cat, I mean, again, the cat's a great performer, and it's looking at the mannequin and listening, but I thought that was very weird. I don't know.
You're right. The cat is completely and fully committed to understanding this girl and realizing that it's fucking up and not getting there quicker. I totally believe its performance. But as I said, this could be the greatest wraparound of all time if you could figure out what in crazy fucking hell is going on here. The cat stops at a retail store window, a display window, looks up a mannequin. He's looking at a mannequin, a ghostly Drew Barrymore dressed as the mannequin is superimposed and comes to life and then starts exhorting the cat that it's getting closer. You have to hurry. It's going to be here soon. So you've got this idea that maybe this is a psychic girl calling out to this cat, right? Might be.
Yeah.
We don't know, but there's no time because the cat can no longer tarry. It has to get on a truck and go wherever the hell that truck is going because this is one smart cat. And it takes us directly to the heart of New York City, baby.
Yeah, in New York City in 1985 in all of its glory. We've talked about this on other podcasts, but movies like this are a wonderful time capsule of a certain place and time. And it was great to see New York City, or at least that depiction of it, in 1985.
HP, you're a big fan of B-roll over on your show, Night Mr. Walters. You'll be happy to know that all the shots of New York here are all pickup shots, including Atlantic City. This entire movie was filmed in Wilmington, North Carolina. That's where Dino De Laurentiis was forging his studio, his empire.
And that explains why the cat starts off in New York City, goes to New Jersey, and then for the final story ends up in Wilmington, North Carolina. Makes perfect
Crazy,
sense.
right? And okay, so now we're in New York City. Cat is immediately absconded with by some ruffian who says, "Save me a trip to the vet," or something like that. And off he goes. Who is that guy? I don't know. Because we're now introduced to our main protagonist here in our first story. The story is called Quitters Incorporated. This is adapted from a Night Shift short story by Stephen King, and again, adapted by Stephen King himself. And we're introduced to normal human being James Woods, who's being entreated by his friend that the way to quit smoking is through this corporation called Quitters Incorporated, which is not advertised. You can't really find any hide nor hair of it as a company. You effectively have to be invited by a member in order to participate in it. James Woods wants to do the right thing. He's got a wife and kid at home. He doesn't want to smoke anymore, and in he goes.
I will say this, not to interrupt you for a minute, but I will say the guy that grabs the cat at the beginning, I will say the car that he absconds with the cat does have Quitters Incorporated emblazoned on the door. So,
right.
So I think there is some awareness of Quitters Incorporated, but at the same time, as you're going to describe, I'm sure there's more to it than meets the eye.
Yeah. Okay, so we're treated to James Woods going into this, just a nondescript lobby, a lot of artwork on the walls, anti-smoking artwork. I'm haunted by the one where it's just it's a head that's a full cigarette, like the smoke pouring out of it, and the mouth with another cigarette hanging out of it. Although that pretty much could be a photo of me in my 20s. But the only other potential customer, is a weeping man sitting on a couch. And James Woods basically is going to take off. He's not hanging out for this, but he's intercepted by the head of Quitters Incorporated, played Dr. Vinny Donati, played by Alan King. Horse belt comedian Alan King as Dr. Vinny Donati. And the name Vinny Donati should give you some idea of what's behind Quitters Incorporated. This is a mob front. What'd you think about Alan King's performance here, HP?
So this was a renaissance period for Alan King, because he was, like you said, he was sort of a borscht belt comedian. I think he had a little bit of Vegas edge to him. But I just remember him, like when Don Amici made Cocoon, all of a sudden, not to say this, Alan King, this was his vehicle to greater success, but I just remember him being around more and becoming more popular around this time, like Jackie Mason sort of. But I will say, I knew him as that comic, but in this segment, in this movie, I loved his performance. He is scary. He is no nonsense. He is over the top at times, but he gets the job done. I thought he did a wonderful job as the sort of, I guess, the public face of Quitters Incorporated.
I could not agree with you more. This is my favorite performance of his. He runs every emotion, and I believe every single one of them. When he's being sincere and chummy, I believe he's actually genuinely concerned about James Woods' health. And when he's threatening him, I believe he means every word, which, I mean, he pays that off. But there are little tiny moments, little human moments here. Like he and his henchmen make a bet or are constantly betting between each other and about whether or not a couple will reconcile or not after what they're about to do to them. So yeah, I think he's great here. I agree. Like in the 80s, there seemed to be suddenly a lot of these older comedians figured out that comedy and drama ain't that far off. And they're actually adept at both. And I think we've discovered more and more over the years that the better the comedian is, the better they are as a dramatic actor. If you give most dramatic actors a run for their money because they can't be funny.
Absolutely. And he's a funny guy. I've seen his routines and I knew him well as a comic, but he is really fucking scary through a lot of this movie. And like you said, you believe that there's a part of him that is really concerned for his patients for this character of Dickie in particular. But the things you see him do in the service of trying to help his clients, we were talking about how thematically this movie it gets very heavy for a PG-13 movie. And there's perhaps no greater example of that than the character of Dr. Donati. He's fabulous.
Yeah, this episode in particular represents a level of black humor that's running through this episode. And Alan King is not playing anything for humor, but ends up being the funniest thing in it. And James Woods should know right from the get-go what's in store for him here, because he's asked to give Alan King his final pack of cigarettes, which Alan King dutifully opens up, lays on the thing, and then pounds the hell out of like he can't stand them, like they're kind of currently on fire on his desk. And this is when we discover that there's some mob ties behind Quitters Incorporated and that their methods are unorthodox and they will be watching you and you will not want to smoke at all. This is where they actually give him the demonstration of the cat and show us the room, which is horrific. So this is why I'm saying that the cat is more integrated into this story than the second story, because at least it's used as a device here. Because Quitters Incorporated, we're shown, have a special room, a viewing room. Is it two-way glass? Did you figure it's mirrored, right? So she can't see that she's being watched, or the cat in this case can't. To them, it's just
I agree.
a room.
Yeah, because flashing forward a little bit, there will be a person in that room eventually. I don't want to spoil it, but this person can't seem to see their spouse on the other side. Or maybe they're just so in horror at what they're having to endure. But yeah, I landed on the idea that it's like mirrored glass.
So they put the cat in this room. The floor is a wire mesh that they electrify. And then just to be extra ghoulish, they play Six Tears by Question Mark and the Mysterians while the cat is in there. And it's, of course, being sparked. So everywhere it steps is another fresh bit of hell for the cat. And then it's explained the rules of Quitters Incorporated. Do not smoke. We're going to see it. We're going to know it. If that happens once, your wife will be thrown into that room and you get to watch. If it happens again, your daughter will be thrown in there and you get to watch. The third time, someone will come and rape your wife. He says it so casually. It's so fucking scary. And then the fourth time, there won't be a fourth time.
Yeah, and he keeps quoting, he'll say like, well, 73% of our clients will have a relapse. And then he keeps quoting these figures. And I think he said, oh, don't worry, only 2% of our clients, have a failure rate at 3. They relapse a third time, but there won't be a fourth time. But it is that room and the juxtaposition of the music that they're playing. And he says it's because he wants an association with the room and the music. There's this psychology involved with this organization, and this guy being forced to watch this happen, in this case to the cat. And I have to say, we were talking about the performance of the cat and how you had said earlier that you couldn't figure out how the cat didn't, did they actually have these cars crashing around the cat as it's being chased? I was wondering, how do they achieve this effect where the cat is being shocked on the floor, and every time there's a shock, it's a zap. And I was carefully looking. It doesn't look like these little shock like sparks are being matted in. It looks like they're there.
Well, I will say this. That's just a common like prop guy thing for like, they would use that for welding or something. They basically make a little gun that shoots the sparks. So that's somebody under the set shooting sparks up. I don't think anyone is in any danger. And I don't think that floor is electrified. If anything, they're probably shooting compressed air at the cat, and that's freaking the cat out and making it jump. That's what I'm hoping. They shouldn't be doing it anyway. They couldn't have CGI in 1985. But anyway, this cat is a fucking trooper, man. I hope it got lots of treats.
Yeah, I knew, or at least to your point, I was hoping. I mean, I didn't look at the end of the movie to see if there was one of those, like, no animals were harmed in this movie. I hope there was one, but knowing deep down that they weren't going to actually shock this cat, but it's shot really well and it's edited really well, and the effects, as practical effects, are so compelling. It just made you want this cat to survive and do what it has to do to get out of there, I guess.
Thus begins a really tense rest of the story. No, you know what? We can't get to the tension yet, because first we're treated to James Woods having quit smoking, freaking out. If anyone out there has quit smoking, I know I quit many, many times. Those first 24 hours, 48 hours without the nicotine are pure fucking hell. And he's selling it. It's James Woods. Look, I know he's a fucking nut job these days. He was always a good performer, always a great actor. And this story would be 50% less effective without James Woods in a lesser actor's hands. But the reason I bring this scene up is, first of all, we get yet another Stephen King call out. He's watching The Dead Zone on television. And this is the scene that eventually spirals into the dream sequence. Okay, they've look, for a thriller where you are being surveyed, a better song could not have come around than I'll Be Watching You by The Police, or Every Breath You Take by The Police, which they've licensed here, but now they have some fucking bullshit cover artist playing, right? So you get kind of excited when the bass starts up, right? And that guitar and the drums, but bait and switch, everybody. We're treated to a dream sequence unlike any other, where they're trying to show how enticing smoking is. Everyone is smoking, and he's supposed to be like, want to smoke, but it all looks disgusting. Like there's a guy with his wife on the couch where smoke is just pouring out of him over and over again. There's some dancing cigarette packs. Yeah, he's at one point. So he's talking with this sort of drunk friend of his who is played by James Rebhorn. Oh yeah, I love him. Obviously he's been in Independence Day and Meet the Parents and all these movies, but he's really young here. And so he's talking to this drunk friend of his, and as he's talking, the friend has more and more cigarettes. At one point, he's got both hands are just festooned with cigarettes, and he's putting them in his mouth, and they've done something to his eyebrows, where they almost look sort of demonic and devil-like, and he keeps saying, "How about a cigarette? How?" And he's just putting it up to his mouth and blowing all this smoke, and like pouring out of his ears.
It's pouring out of his ears, and then maybe forgive me if you're getting to this, but so the song "Every Breath You Take" is playing, and then for the sort of climax of this sequence,
oh boy,
he looks over at the staircase, and there is Dr. Donati. He's dressed in kind of this, it's almost like an Elvis jumpsuit, and he is lip syncing the words to "Every Breath You Take, I'll Be Watching You," and he's like dancing and bopping around, and it is so surreal and so horrific in its sort of, canted, camera angles, and the room is all smoky, and man, it kind of becomes, it's funny, but it's intense, the sequence.
Yeah, it's like, as ridiculous as it is, it's so menacing. What I love, this is sort of not really a gaffe, but when Alan King, who's lip syncing the song, says, "I'll be watching you," he makes an ooh kind of face, and then they superimpose smoke pouring out of it. I guess Alan King didn't want to have any smoke in his mouth to come out of there, but it comes in just a second too late. So for a second, it looks like Alan King is just blowing James Woods a kiss.
Yeah, but there's something about because all we've seen of this guy is the brutal methods that he's using. I mean, at one point he like James Woods tries to take a swing at him to get him to stop shocking the cat. And just as easily as anything, Donati kind of grabs him and does this almost like this sort of martial arts move and gets him. His arm is behind his back, and you can see how strong and brutal and menacing this guy is. So to see him doing this sort of Vegas-y Elvis thing, but the message behind it is, I am watching you. Don't take a smoke because I am watching you. Very, very effective.
And at this point, Louis Teague really starts earning his paycheck because now it becomes a tense thriller. And there's the first sort of shock is James Woods waking up in the night and there's lightning storm going on outside. And he snuck downstairs because he's going to sneak a cigarette, or he might not. And then was that a cough in the closet? It's a great sequence where he goes in and realizes. He doesn't realize it at first. He just opens it, sees no one in there. And then a bunch of stuff drops out, then tosses an umbrella into it. And you hear, ooh. And then he realizes just how serious Quitters Incorporated actually is. Anyone else in that situation would have probably picked something else up and started swinging, but he knows now what he's in for. It's horrifying.
And there's this shot, I think that comes a little earlier where it's in the morning. I think it's the first morning where he has quit smoking and he kind of goes outside and he's just trying to loosen himself up. He's a little uptight and he sees a jogger jogging by, this sort of overweight guy who's jogging, who's kind of looking at him, and he kind of looks back at him like he's not sure what to make of it. And then the camera cuts to the opposite angle and you see the jogger is jogging with dress shoes and black socks. So we as audience members know this guy's already under surveillance. Like these guys are serious. So yeah, it very intense.
In order to get to that first moment that his wife is brought down and tossed into it, he has to have that first cigarette. And man, oh man, they make the perfect scenario for him to do it. He's out in traffic. It's like a drawbridge situation. So he's in a secluded area. They couldn't possibly have gotten that. They're not in his car. There's no one around looking at him. And there just so happens to be a forgotten pack of cigarettes. If he could just lean down and do it without anyone looking. This is my favorite moment in the entire segment, HP. When James Woods lights the cigarette, when he gets that breath of tobacco in, right? The moment of not triumph of the inhale of the cigarette and feeling how joyous that is again, but the moment where he realizes he's gotten away with it, James Woods kind of laughs to himself a little bit like, yeah, it's working. It's working. It's not working. Because when he leans up, the car next to him is one of the Quitters Incorporated guys who's staring right at him. It's horrible. And thus begins a race home. No cell phones, folks. If someone's coming for your wife at home, you better fucking be faster than them or be close to a payphone.
Yeah, it is scary because he knows immediately what he did and what the repercussions are going to be because Dr. Donati has made it very clear to him what happens if he has a cigarette. So he like you said, he races home and it's just such a heart racing sequence because he gets there and there's something on the stove. It's been burning. He sees that the front door, the screen has been punched in and it really is because like you said, he thought he was getting away with something, but no, they do this. They've been doing this far too long for him to put one over on them.
You know, while I'm watching this segment, I'm constantly coming up with scenarios where he could have gotten away with it. Because I can obviously put myself in his situation having been a smoker for as long as I was. And I keep coming to, he needs to rent a boat and have it ready for him and then drive like a maniac to that dock and then get on the boat and then drive out into the middle of the ocean and then smoke, and then drive back in.
But they would figure something out. They would have like some sort of an ally on a fishing boat or some way. I'll tell you, if it was modern day, they would just have a drone that would
following him everywhere. Yes, a Critters Incorporated these days would be super duper scary. Accessing your home cameras and your Ring and everything just to see if you're smoking. Like they could test your air. Anyway, so they throw his wife in the thing. It ain't pretty. And this is where Alan King and his minion, I believe Junk is his name, they sort of callously bet whether or not the couple will reconcile, or she'll tell him to go to hell and leave him. I don't know that my significant other would stay with me if something I did caused them to be tossed into a room that was electrified. Certainly not right away.
No, and actually, in fact, I think I think Dr. Donati was the one who says, well, she's either going to throw her arms around him and hug him until he gets a hernia, or she's going to slap him. And he bets that she's going to hug him. And Junk says, no, I bet she's going to slap him. And it's, like I said, he's been doing this long enough that he obviously has an eye for this sort of thing. But no, I agree with you. Like, well, at this point, he's in too deep. I mean, what can she do? Really?
Yeah, I guess he would have to say, it's the mafia. I don't know what to tell you. They will kill us all.
Yeah, and I think they kind of leave the impression that he's a bit of a sort of a, for lack of a better term, he's kind of a yuppie, and they're living kind of an upscale sort of life in New York City. So there is that. I mean, it's not as if they don't have a comfortable life. And they kind of make it clear early on that she loves him, because when he tells her that he's quitting smoking before any of this really escalates, she says, "Oh yeah, that's great. I love you too, and I'm glad you're doing it for me, and I'm glad you're doing it for his daughter." I think her name is Alicia. Which I don't think did you mention that sequence with
I
Alicia?
have not mentioned Alicia. We haven't met Alicia yet. Who's Alicia played by?
Well, Alicia is played by our girl. It's Drew Barrymore in a bad wig. But
The hell is
here's the
going
thing.
on here? This isn't Dr. Strangelove.
The weird thing about this, the uncomfortable thing about this sequence, where at one point he drives to the school where she's attending. She's a little girl, but I think they're implying that she is special needs.
Oh, they're
in some
definitely
way.
implying it. It's 100% that. It's very problematic and very cringy. That
Yeah, no, that was
it was cringy
precisely
then.
my
You
reaction.
know what? Let me just say, I remember sitting in the theater and thinking, why are they doing this?
Yeah, it was really unnecessary. Like you don't. It only makes it more awful that that the possibility that this poor girl could be thrown into the electrified chamber. But yeah, it's bizarre. This girl is Drew Barrymore, the same one we see in The Mannequin, the same one we're going to see throughout the story. She's kind of, in a way, she's part of the wraparound story, I guess.
Hey, if you were confused by that mannequin coming to life, well, here's the mannequin fully alive, but it's a whole different character and knows nothing of a cat. Moving on.
In fairness, I think Stephen King was doing a lot of cocaine at the time.
No.
I'm sorry. Was that Maximum Overdrive? Was that
Yes,
a few
that would
years
be the
in-
following year, sir, when the cocaine trucks would begin backing up into Stephen King's life.
Gotcha.
We don't get to any of the repercussions. We don't get any of seems almost a little frustrating. Like this should have been an hour-long segment. Critters Incorporated. It's so juicy as a concept, and I'm curious as to the interpersonal relationships going on when you're stuck with the mob, who are only trying to make you better. It's really weird. It's a dynamic kind of an idea. But anyway, yeah, we jump ahead, and now it's been 6 months, 8 months.
And they're very friendly. He's actually very friendly with Dr. Donati at this point, because
They're weighing him and, talking, joking around.
they're pals. Even the guy Junk, who was really rather brutal, he's in there kind of he has a clipboard and he's recording the guy's weight. He's attending.
Come on, 6 pounds in 8 months? Is that bad? No, I think it sounds great.
Yeah. So what's happening is, like, they quote figures that, when someone quits smoking, they invariably gain weight. So there's a subsection of Quitters Incorporated that's devoted to weight loss, like maintaining weight loss, right? And that's what they're depicting here, where now there's a whole nother program, and they make a joke about it. Like, what happens if he gains more weight?
Oh, yeah, you're going to come to my house with a flamethrower? No, we're going to cut off your wife's little finger. Ha ha, you guys at Quitters Incorporated, here we go. Obviously we now have cut to a dinner party, and it's two couples, James Woods and his wife, and the other couple is the couple that introduced James Woods to Quitters Incorporated. They're toasting. Let's toast. What do you want to toast to, HP? I know what I want to toast to.
Like a toast to Quitters Incorporated.
You think, first of all, neither of the wives were going to toast to Quitters Incorporated. neither of the wives was toasting to quitters and they'd be like, they threw me in an electric room and played 96 Tears. Now, when the classic rock station is on, I sometimes urinate on myself. That would be one wife's reaction. Never mind the other wife's reaction, who is missing her finger because the fucking husband couldn't stop stuffing his gullet. And he's saying, hey, let's toast to Quitters Incorporated. Nothing happened to me. I quit smoking and I've maintained my weight.
Yeah, that's the horrifying button on this whole tale, because that's the lasting image that we're left with, is the shot of the woman with the glass in her hand and her pinky is cut off at the knuckle. And yeah, I mean, it's essentially this is the most, well, I can't say it's the most. This is very indebted to EC Comics, because that is exactly the kind of ending that you would see in EC Comics, where it's, that the horror hasn't ended. It's just beginning for these people.
Yeah, man, this is 70s Stephen King short fiction. It's lean, it's economical, and it has a black heart beating at its center. I loved this story. I think it's great. Definitely worthy of anthology horror. On to our next story. Where's that cat going?
So the cat is headed to Atlantic City. What I love
As
about
one does.
This transition is great, because you have the shot of the severed pinky, and then there's basically kind of a dissolve to these hobos that are feeding the cat a hot dog on a stick. So it's kind of this nice dichotomy between like the pinky being severed and the resembling finger of the hot dog on the stick. But we're in Atlantic City. I think at the end, don't we see the cat like hitches a ride on a truck or something to get out of because it escapes eventually. I can't remember how it escapes.
It jumps in a cab driven by Elaine Nardo on her way to Atlantic City.
Going to the art gallery.
Yeah. Anyway, it gets there. The cat has now brought us to the Vegas by the Sea, Atlantic City, New Jersey. We're introduced to our next story and our new set of characters. Basically, a crime boss and his flunky and his flunky's dumb girlfriend. And he's checking out for the night. The mob boss is played by Mr. Kenneth McMillan. Now,
I'm sorry. Can I interrupt 1 sec? I'm really sorry to interrupt. One thing that you've glossed over is, before we see this, so the cat has now arrived in Atlantic City and it's wandering the streets after it has a bite of the hot dog from the hobo. It stops in front of a store window. There's a television playing.
Right.
And once again,
it's
a commercial with a little girl. I don't recall what she's advertising, but again, it's Drew Barrymore, and superimposed on this commercial with the girl. Again, we have this sort of ghostly apparition saying, "You have to find me. You have to come fast. You have to." So it's the second incident of this cat hallucinating the girl. I just felt like I had to mention that.
Are they trying to say that in this cat's mind, every girl is one girl? There is only one girl in the world. My girl. My owner. It makes sense. Is it like a Big Fish, the Tim Burton film sort of a situation where Ewan McGregor, basically, there's the girl he's in love with, and every other girl is basically played by Helena Bonham Carter, and he's basically like, there was my girl and every other girl, which is a sweet and beautiful notion. Do you think Louis Teague is employing that here in the form of Drew Barrymore in its relationship with a cat?
I think that's probably the answer that makes the most sense, because there's really no other explanation for why this is happening. I guess you could reach for some sort of supernatural explanation, but then it leads to more and more questions and more confusion. So I think that's as good an explanation as any, Father Malone.
Well, I hope so. All right, here we go. Kenneth McMillan, baby, is our mob boss. He's planning something nefarious. He's already ordered his minion into some sort of action that we're going to get to. But a word about Kenneth McMillan. I fucking love him. That's what I got to say about him. This is Baron Vladimir Harkonnen to me. HB, this actually pointed me toward an unusual phenomenon, which is, at the time, if a celebrity or if an actor were in enough movies that were on rotation in cable, to me, they were the most famous actor in the world.
I agree, because Dune was on a lot. I remember seeing the trailer for Dune where he would scream, "He who controls the spice controls the universe." That's Kenneth McMillan. But yeah, I agree. Well, that was it. Even beyond an actor being featured prominently. I mean, just movies in general. I mean, I would see like canon movies that weren't really even maybe playing that heavily theatrically, but because they're so prominent on cable TV as kids, you just get this impression this must be a good popular movie because it's on all the fucking time. And by extension, this actor that I'm seeing all the fucking time must be the most famous actor in the world. Hence Kenneth McMillan.
Yeah, and like I said, he was in a lot of TV and he was in a lot of movies that were in constant rotation and all for the best. You know what? In my mind, he should have been as famous as he was to me because he's always great. In particular here, I said James Woods was good in the last episode. Can't hold a candle to what Kenneth McMillan is doing here. He is at turns horrifyingly menacing and a delight. I love this guy. Like, what he finds funny, I find funny. At the same time, I don't want to be in a room with him. Anyway, what we're dealing with here is Kenneth McMillan making a bet with his buddy because they spot that cat and they think the cat is going to be crushed on its way across the freeway. And this is the stunt that I mentioned earlier, the one that is very either troubling or a brilliant special effect, where they effectively lure the cat across the street and cars are crashing all around it. And it's a fantastic piece of action. No question.
I don't know.
It's as good as Bruce Willis jumping off of the fucking roof with the flames going up, everybody. And it's worth seeing, except it's very troubling.
It is very troubling. And like I said, I probably should have stuck around to make sure that no animals were harmed in the making of this movie, because not only is it a tense sequence, because these guys are betting on whether this poor cat will live or die. And they're even trying to sort of spike the bet a little bit by going, here, kitty, kitty, here, kitty, kitty. And that when these cars are crashing and it's dashing across the freeway, like, I think it even goes to slow motion where, so you see these cars, the impact and the cat dashing just in the nick of time to get across. It is marvelous to observe and yet completely irresponsible as somebody who loves animals.
Okay, now that is basically where the cat's role in this story ends. Other than Kenneth McMillan picks the cat up and now they're friends and he's taking care of the cat. We go back to Kenneth McMillan's pad and our new story begins. I mentioned everything anthology is an echo or a ripple from the stone that is Creepshow in the giant pond. This one is 100% something to tide you over. It's basically the same thing, except that it without the supernatural element. Kenneth McMillan is a mob boss. His wife has been having an affair with Robert Hayes, who is a burned out tennis pro, and they're about to run off together. He puts her on a bus to get her out of here, and it's too late, baby. They grab him. What's his name? Oh my God, I forgot the guy's name.
The henchman?
Yes.
So it's Mike Starr and Charles S. Dutton.
Oh my
are the
God.
henchmen.
It's Mike Starr. Oh, don't you love Mike Starr?
He's fantastic. I couldn't point to one specific, because he was never a star, but he was always great in everything he was in. He was obviously, people remember him from like Dumb and Dumber. He was also in a show that I watched. I think it was like maybe the early 2000s. It was a decent show called Ed, which was really good. But obviously Charles S. Dutton, who has a full head of hair, but I always knew him, and you probably too, Father Malone. He was in a TV show called Rock. He was in Rudy, of course. He was like the groundskeeper who takes Rudy under his wing in the movie. He's a fantastic actor, but
he fights an alien with his bare hands.
That's right. He was in Alien 3. That's exactly right.
Damn right he was. And by the way, Mike Starr, if you want some definitive stuff from Mike Starr, check out his performance in Ed Wood as the producer who ends up producing Glenda. Look, Ed, you seem like a nice guy. He's great in that. An even better performance, an even more natural performance is The Summer of Sam. He plays Adrian Brody's stepdad in that. And
You're right. You are absolutely right. Oh, I remembered Ed Wood, but it didn't come top of mind when I thought of Mike Starr. That is a great call out.
So our hoods are way too qualified hoods. grab Robert Hayes, late of Airplane and the television series Starman. Remember that?
Yeah.
I love Robert Hayes, but he's no Jeff Bridges. Anyway, but wait, what's the TV series he was on? The other TV series.
I don't remember a TV series, but he was in a movie on cable called Take This Job and Shove It.
Oh my God. Well, that was released in theaters with Tim Thomerson. I remember that. I remember the previews for that in theaters, baby.
I don't remember
Mr.
another
Such
TV
and Such,
series.
you can take your job and shove it. Take this job and shove it. I ain't working here no more.
Yeah, but he's iconic in Airplane. I mean, it's unfortunate because that's his legacy, the one and only movie, but he was so good in it. He was perfect.
Wait,
because he's
not his only legacy. He was also in Airplane 2, the sequel.
There you go. That's even better because that one took place on the space shuttle.
Wow.
That's a better movie.
Absolutely.
But yeah, no.
They didn't recycle any jokes from the first film.
But he's, in all fairness, Robert Hayes is good here because he's not called upon to do much except be really scared for what he has to endure and then be really, really pissed when all is said and done. He's fine in this.
Oh, I'm having fun with Robert Hayes. I think he's great in it, actually. Like what he's called on to do here, like shimmying around the ledge of an entire building. That's the plot of it, everybody. Spoilers. So, I think he's great. I feel every biting wind and every pinwheeling your arms to stay in balance and every pecking at your ankle, thanks to Robert Hayes here. So what we're given here is a wager. This is, by the way, the second one based on a Stephen King short story. The Ledge is the name of the short story. And the short story is effectively the same exact thing here. He adapted himself pretty precisely. This mob boss has found out about the affair and has planted cocaine in Robert Hayes's the trunk of his car. He's going to have him arrested and thrown away basically for life. Or he can perform one little task, one little wager. And if that happens, then he'll get his wife and $10,000 in cash, and they'll take the drugs out of his car, and he'll be exonerated and go about his merry way. The bet, however, is that there is a 3, maybe 5-inch ledge that runs around the perimeter of the building. He has to make his way around the entire building without falling. If he does that, he gets everything.
The mob boss's like apartment or whatever it's on like the 50th floor. It's not the penthouse, but it is so high, and the effects here, aside from some really bad matting, which we can talk about later, but yeah, it's so impossibly high, and he has to clamber around this 3 to 5 inch ledge, and he says, like, I never welched on a bet in my life. So you're led to believe that this mob boss will be a man of his word. We already saw him make a bet that the cat's going to make it across the road safely. So yeah, that's his only option. The only thing he can do is dance to this man's tune and try to make it around the building. What he doesn't mention, though, what he leaves out, what Kressner, the guy's name, leaves out is that he's not just going to let Robert Hayes off his merry way and wait for him to go around the building. He is going to perform little, for lack of a better word, pranks and tricks on him to get him to fall off the building quickly.
Yes, he's going to urge him along in nefarious ways.
I just want to keep you on your toes.
Kenneth McMillan, baby. He's so scary and funny. I want to be his friend, but I don't want him to come anywhere near me.
He's really scary here, but we talked about Alan King, who's more deadly serious in the first episode, but in this one, really, Kenneth McMillan leads with the humor and the charm, but he leaves there's no mistaking the idea that he means business. And if this guy doesn't do what he says, it's going to be bad. Like, he's got this guy dead to rights, and he leaves the guy no choice but to do this awful thing.
Now, can I just say that here's where I think Stephen King could have tied up his stories in a much more organic way than just random story, linking devices a cat. If this mob boss had simply been the same guy from Critters Incorporated. Like, this is what he does in his off time. Like if the Quitters Incorporated story had ended with him saying goodbye to James Woods and then we follow him to his car and he drives off to Atlantic City, that could have been great. It would have robbed us of one of two great performances, but it would have, I think, streamlined the movie a little bit better.
It could have, and we even have the little nugget of Dr. Donati making a bet with his henchman about whether the wife is going to hit him or hug him. So that would have thematically worked, I think. I don't know that I would have been exactly on board because I think there's something about the exaggerated character of Kressner and the fact that he is this Atlantic City kind of wheeler dealer gambler type that works well here. I don't know if the more straight-laced Dr. Donati would have been as effective, but I see where you're going with this. I don't think it's totally off track.
Well, what occurred to me while watching Kenneth McMillan was, boy, I would love to see more Kenneth McMillan as this character. Damn, if they had only put him in that first story, we would have gotten twice as much Kenneth McMillan. Could he also play the troll in the final story? Okay, so he's keeping Robert Hayes on his toes. Robert Hayes is making his way slowly but surely. This is shot fantastically well. I don't know if this is miniatures or rear projection or cyclorama on it's probably some combination thereof. All of the stuff that does not involve movement of the camera in an up and down motion looks great here. But it's whenever we sort of decide to show the height which is what's crazy to me is he never cuts to a shot from like the street looking up. You know, he never cuts to even like say 3 or 4 floors below to give you some sense of the scale. Nevertheless, it doesn't need it. I'm just saying it's weird that he never does it.
Yeah, you could have at least given a sense of scale to it, but I think to your point, it doesn't matter because we already understand the stakes of what he's doing and the fact that, like, at one point, the closest we come to that is at one point Kressner has like an old timey horn that he honks at him to startle him, and he ends up like throwing the horn out the window, and we see the horn fall and fall and fall for probably for far too long given the actual height. But it falls for so long and it finally hits the ground and it's just like it just pancakes itself. So at least there, that's enough of a clue as to how high the guy is. But I do agree that might have been a technical shortcoming somehow, but it was effective as long as, like you said, it didn't move around. The camera didn't move around too much. But it is harrowing him, because it's, he goes through a lot, even just going around that building, not just Kressner throwing things at him, shooting a fire hose at him at one point, because he has found this gap,
little
alcove where he can take
architectural abnormality that, well, yeah, exactly. Like, I could just sit here for just a little while. Oh, this would be nice. This is after, it should be pointed out, after the Pigeon from Hell sequence, where this one determined pigeon willing to go to war over his territory consistently pecks at his ankle. And you get this little spot of blood through his white sock that only gets worse. And the pigeon keeps bullseyeing that wound. Oh my God. He gets into that alcove and kicks the shit out of that goddamn pigeon. It was wonderful.
Yeah. The pigeon was the worst part of it for me, I have to say, just because and again, it's a good call out to these animal wranglers because he's shuffling along. It's not as if it's the pigeon is acting in a static shot with this guy. Like you can see the guy's foot moving as he's shuffling along and the bird is moving with him.
Right there
with him. At the same time, he's pecking. And like you said, it starts as this little red dot on his socks and he just keeps, and you can almost feel the pain that he felt because the spot gets bigger and bigger. His sock gets torn by the pecking and he just won't stop. And God bless that pigeon because I never got the sense, like sometimes you see these animals and you can almost see like the trainer waving something in their face to get them to do something. But this bird looked pretty autonomous to me and it was pretty horrific to see what he did.
We needed an Avengers-like team up featuring this pigeon, the cat from this movie, General. We also need the dog from The Thing. Those three, that's a good foundation right there.
That was amazing. But so that happens. And then
Well,
Robert
HP,
Hayes.
let me just say, mentioning that horn, the falling horn, I don't know that there was a technical problem. Maybe they were shooting this on a soundstage, so you don't want to shoot up because you're going to see the lights. But I think they thought the falling horn sequence would be a fine and dandy replacement for any shot from down below. But the problem is, and you mentioned it earlier, the dodgy effects. If there are dodgy effects in this movie, they're right here because it is this traveling matte shot of this horn tumbling with the background spinning past it. It's horrifically composited. You would wonder why they just didn't throw a horn in slow motion and follow it with a camera or something, or put it on a string or something. It's terrible looking. Anyway, that's my quibble before we move on to the juiciness.
Yeah, agreed 100%. The matte lines are so thick in this and so obviously fake that it couldn't help but take me out of it a little bit.
It's going to get even worse at the end. They're going to do it again to deleterious effect. So look, man, he's almost there. There's really only one thing keeping him from it, and it's a gigantic fucking neon sign. Kenneth McMillan, Kressner failed to mention that part of the path was going to be interrupted by a circular logo neon hanging off the building that he's going to have to navigate. It's very harrowing. This could be very cheesy 80s TV action, and instead it's really scary.
Yeah, it feels very realistic because there's no footholds in this area where the neon sign is. It's all very sharp, narrow corners of the lettering of this sign, this lit sign. So he's got to figure out a way to navigate it. And in the process of doing that, I think it's like a T or something. He ends up grabbing the top of the T, and it's like something out of, I don't know, like Buster Keaton or something, because or Harold
that
Lloyd,
giant
because
clock. But even scarier because the length of this thing like throws him all the way out into space. He's basically at the halfway point across the street.
And the whole time, Kressner is popping in and out of windows and leaning out, and he is having the best time watching this guy who's sleeping with his wife, fumbling around, almost, falling off the building. He's laughing his butt off. He's loving it. And that's pretty horrible.
He really ought to be thanking Mr. Norris here for probably the best time he's had in ages.
Yeah, no, it's so he's deriving such glee from this because there's nothing we understand. There's nothing this guy loves more than a good wager, but I suspect what he loves even more than that is watching this this tennis pro punk who's making time with his wife, getting what he thinks he deserves, and it's you feel that from him because
and you know what?
He's just loving it.
And again, this echoes something to Tide You Over from Creepshow, because there again, the character of Richard Vickers, played by Leslie Nielsen, is a gleeful villain, like just a demented human being who is doing the worst thing ever, and yet somehow you kind of continue to like them. And that's part performance, because obviously Leslie Nielsen and Kenneth McMillan are real fucking heavy hitters. Let's not forget. But a good majority of it is that Stephen King can write characters. I keep saying economically, and I'm going to say it again. He writes them. He can write you a character within a couple of lines of dialogue can tell you everything you need to know about them, and it doesn't feel like a cheat.
But it's interesting because I hadn't sat down and thought of the fact that there is such a parallel between Something to Tide You Over and this second sequence. But you are 100% right. It's basically a thinly disguised, almost like a rewrite of it, because you have the sort of, cuckolded husband who is, giving it back to the guy who is sleeping with his wife. There's no as you said, there's nothing supernatural about this sequence, though. It's all too real. And that may make it more horrifying and identifiable to the average person, because this, this could, I guess, in theory, this could happen. I don't know that someone would actually make it around the building like he did, but that could happen. It's unlikely that somebody who's buried up to their neck in the sand would come back as a waterlogged zombie that would take revenge. But this is so much more grounded.
It's probably more like It's probably more likely that you would come back as a waterlogged corpse than you could actually navigate around this building. Nevertheless, Norris does it. Hooray! He's going to get everything he came for. He's going to get that money. They're going to take the drugs out of his car, and they're going to give him his wife. What's in the box, HB? Long before 7.
Long before, and he says, Kressner says, I'm a man of my word. Here's the money, and you get the money, and you get my wife. And he kind of kicks the bag of money over to the guy, and what rolls out of the bag, but his wife's severed head, which, again, we've talked about this. I am 1985, so I'm 12 years old. It's not very violent. Well, I mean, the thought of it is violent, but it's not graphic because it's just a second or two of a severed head that you can't even really identify except for the hair. But the idea of that is really shocking and horrible to think about, that this guy, that he would do this, and and there's something in Robert Hayes. He looks at it and he says it in such a way that you feel like this guy has been pushed beyond his limits. And this is like the height of horror for this guy in this moment. That's probably what any of us would say, given the circumstances, if we saw this happen in front of us. It really is shocking and just awful to think about the repercussions of that.
The effect isn't great. It's basically a mannequin head with some blood on it rolling across the floor. That in and of itself is not horrible, but you're right. The reason it works is because Robert Hayes is fucking awesome here. His reaction is so horrified. It's a dawning realization that happens in a moment, but you feel every emotion there. But the other component that makes it so memorable and so menacing and so fucked up my childhood as it did yours is the menace behind Kenneth McMillan when he kicks the bag over. He might as well be cutting her head off in front of us.
Exactly. And at this point, he has kept his word. He's lost the bet, but there's no way that Norris is going to walk out of that room alive. He's paid up, but that doesn't indemnify Norris from getting killed after the fact.
They tussle for the gun. It's a good sequence. Okay, I mentioned earlier the James Woods moment of him realizing he's getting away with it, ain't he a bad boy, it is fantastic. The other fantastic performance, and this is actually probably better than the James Woods performance, when Kenneth McMillan is begging for his life, he's crawling on the floor, on his back, beneath a coffee table. There's a penthouse on the coffee table. He's stops to start reading the magazine in the middle of the begging, like completely distracted, and it doesn't feel weird. It feels actually appropriate. It's such a bizarre choice, and it's great, and it makes me love this character all the way down to the final moment where he squishes on the ground outside on the ledge. They make him do it. You know it. There are no spoilers here. We've all seen this episode.
It is very weird because I was half expecting, as he was flipping through the Penthouse magazine, I thought that he would throw in a line like, hey, with all your money, get one of these broads from this magazine. But he doesn't. There's no reason for him logically to be flipping through a penthouse while he's begging for his life. And yet he does, and yet it works because the character is so demented. It really is a brilliant performance. It's hard for me. We already talked about how good Alan King is, but I think you're right. I think the commitment to the character, I think Kenneth McMillan might edge him out a little bit, I think.
He makes me believe that the thought of preserving his own life and thumbing through this porno magazine are of equal importance to him. And as weird as I might find it, I believe that character really does need that at that moment. It's fantastic. Anyway, all right. So on to our final tale. What's this one called? This is the original.
I guess this is Cat's Eye, right? I mean, I don't.
No, sir. This one is called General.
Oh, the name of it is General, because it has to be said, there are no title cards during the movie to indicate what the names of these stories are. So I'm actually...
The trilogy of
first
terror?
Yeah, I mean, Cat's Eye is obviously the name of the movie, but I wasn't aware that this was called General, but it makes perfect sense because that's the name that the girl will give the cat as it makes its way to her house in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Yes, finally, all of the fucking bizarro weirdness of Ghost Drew Barrymore appearing on television and appearing on mannequins is paying off. This is where we've followed a general to his final destination, and it's in North Carolina, I guess. And it's a little girl who has a parakeet and two loving parents, played by James Naughton, who always seems disaffected and wonderful. He's always great as a parent here, but even better than him, good God, Candy Clark. There she is.
Fantastic. Yeah, American Graffiti, Blue Thunder, Man Who Fell to Earth. She's wonderful in this, and she's very good. In that era, there was a very particular type of mother figure in a movie like I already talked about, Poltergeist. This sort of, I don't know, a mother with an edge who's not afraid to kind of give it back to the husband a little bit when he's being an idiot, who is not afraid to take matters into her own hands, as we'll see in this segment. But she's fabulous in this. She's really, I believe her as the mother of Drew Barrymore.
Yeah, that particular mom from the 80s, the won't take guff from her husband, but won't take shit from anything. Like, I believe she would knock a motherfucker out in this thing. Like, I've never seen Candy Clark so feisty, and Candy Clark is all feisty. So the cat is arriving now just in time, but that's not its point of view we keep seeing. I love the camera work here. Jack Cardiff is the DP going here. We're introduced to our final antagonist of the piece. It is a troll out of nowhere. What we've been dealing with, people dealing with their addictions to cigarettes and their addictions to gambling. We're now dealing with a troll who's hunting a girl. It's really bizarre. It's out of place. I guess Gene Siskel did have a point.
Yeah, it has to be said before we go any further. I will admit that, I mean, maybe you'll get to this eventually, but I have to say up front that it's not a surprise maybe, but this was my least favorite of the three. Probably mainly because they're, at least in the other two, they're grounded in something real and there's no supernatural element to speak of. But here, this is all supernatural because it's a troll that's living in this girl's bedroom behind the baseboard, and it comes out at night and basically tries to steal her breath. But, it's fine. It has moments, and I don't hate it in and of itself, but it doesn't compare to the other two segments. It was a little too out there for me.
I like it equally to the other segments. It's just different. And, but given what came before, it's very jarring in how different it is because of the supernatural element. It's like, here's the horrors of man. Here's the horrors of man. Here's a troll. It's just, what?
Well, it's interesting. We had talked about earlier how you and I had looked up reviews of the movie of the time. And I was reading, actually, it turns out it was Roger Ebert's review. And he brought up something that I thought was actually, it hadn't occurred to me, and I thought it was actually made a lot of sense, is his take on it was that this movie was essentially, like, the overarching theme of the movie is fear of something happening to someone you love. And when you think about it, in the first tale, it's about James Woods' character trying to protect his wife during this whole ordeal. And the second one, obviously, it's the tennis pro who's trying to protect the woman that he loves, this mob boss's wife. And in the third segment, the segment we're discussing now, it's this cat trying to protect the little girl that he's been so desperately trying to get to through the whole movie. And I hadn't thought of it in exactly those terms, but I think it actually makes a lot of sense.
Would it shock you to know that these stories are out of order from the original screenplay?
Yeah, actually, that would shock me because everything seems to be leading up to this episode with the troll. What was the order originally?
Initially, it started in Atlantic City with then from Atlantic City, that got us to New York. And then we had Quitters Incorporated. And then from New York, it got on took a cab down to North Carolina, and we got this story. So this was always meant to be the showpiece of the story. This was meant to be a bit of Amelia, the trilogy of terror segment with the Zuni fetish doll. It's which it obviously closely resembles when you get right down to it.
Yeah.
Here's the thing that the screenplay definitely does have that the movie does not. It has a prologue where we first encounter our cat and meet its actual family. This screenplay begins with the cat brushing against the hand of a dead girl hanging out of her bed in her bedroom, and the sound of bells jingling and the cat pursuing said jingling bells. And then, so we get the idea that this might be some sort of immortal battle going on, that this cat is constantly pursuing this troll that is constantly killing the same girl in a weird way. I don't know why it's got to be the same girl. Maybe it's just a girl, and I don't know why it's targeted a particular girl. But anyway, it doesn't explain any of that, but it at least gives us more backstory for the cat and the eventual protagonist for the thing. Like, we would have at least heard the bells early enough to, when it comes back, go, oh yeah, that's that thing from the opening. Okay, that would be enough. But then what happens is the dead girl's parents, remember, this movie originally is supposed to open with a dead child. The parents rush in, the mother freaks out, blames the cat, claims the cat has stolen the child's breath, so it sets that up. It's like Chekhov's gun. Sets up the breath stealing, and then the mom goes downstairs and goes to the gun cabinet and takes out an Uzi. That's specified in the screenplay. Suburban housewife mom takes out an Uzi and attempts to murder the cat. And then the cat runs away and then is chased by a Saint Bernard, and our movie begins there.
Well, I guess Uzis were kind of all the rage in action movies. I think like Commando, there were a bunch of Uzis. But what I think I like the idea that we have some context for why and how the cat is going to try and face off against this mortal enemy. But when you were saying that, I thought what you were going to say, what I thought might actually make some sense as well, is if this happens and the mom comes and shoos the cat away and talks to, and then maybe there's another child. I thought you were going to say that the mom who shoos the cat away is actually the mother of Candy Clark in the third segment, because at one point the family is sitting around the table and the father is having some fun imitating Candy Clark's mother, saying, "The cat will come and it will steal your breath." So that, to me, like, maybe there's still supernatural sort of business to deal with, but at least then you have this idea that the mother, having experienced the death of a child, then goes to her other daughter and now is so shaken by the experience that she cautions her, don't ever have a cat in the house because they will steal your breath, just like it stole my child's breath. But of course, they didn't go there. So
You
I
see
guess
how
that's
maddening it is that, as earlier posited, this could have been the best wraparound segment of all time.
could have been. That actually would have, I mean, just a little something, because what we're left with is, it just doesn't make any sense on any level. The fact that this cat keeps seeing this vision of this girl with no context around it. So yeah, it's cool to hear.
It still doesn't make sense why she's appearing is superimposed over televisions and on mannequins, and why it's all the same girl. There are some mysteries I guess we're just not meant to understand, but at least it gives us a little bit of some backstory for General here.
Yeah, no, I agree totally on that. But you know, I think look, I was already a little hard on this segment by saying that it's my least favorite. But having said that, doesn't mean I didn't enjoy the segment for what it is. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening here, and I have to say I love the scale work with the troll, as it's, because the troll will come out of the wall and make its way around this little girl's room and climb up on bookcases and jump on the bed and all this. And they've clearly, so the troll is played by a little person named Daniel Rogers, who you and I know he was one of the druids in Spinal Tap during the famous Stonehenge sequence.
Oh my God, yes.
And he was an Ewok in Return of the Jedi and a few other things. So it's a little person in a costume with this animatronically animated face that's really freaky. But as it's clambering around, they've made a set that's slightly larger to give the sense of scale for this little troll that's clambering around. But it is so believable, the way the set looks, just the actual items being larger than the troll, that unfortunately that's kind of ruined by a lot of bad matting a lot of bad matte lines around things and stuff. But that stuff, I'm sure you probably had a similar reaction, but I loved that about this. I thought the effects work was pretty solid for this segment.
Matte work is not a friend of Cat's Eye, but I agree. I love a scaled up set. They've recreated Drew Barrymore's her bedroom, but in, so that the bed is enormous, that he's able to fall into a jar of marbles. The jar of marbles is my only problem with the scale work, because it's clear that it's like a semi-transparent plastic tube they're dumping him into, whereas previously we're seeing a clear glass jar. Like, those two things don't match up, but everything else does.
And they do some clever stuff. It took me a couple of scenes to notice this. So the troll will come out and it clambers up on Drew Barrymore's bed and moseys up to her chest, and he reaches out his hand and kind of closes her nose so that she starts breathing through her mouth. But what they do is, what the effect is, his head in slight profile is matted in.
Yeah.
But they've got a mechanical hand that's physically present so that when the hand can come out, it's actually making contact with her nose. So it's not just a matted in hand that she has to pretend is grasping her nose. It's an actual hand. I thought it was a brilliant effect.
Yeah,
I thought it was so cool.
It's the best mat work in it, because we're not looking at the mat at all. We're looking at the tiny hand closing Drew Barrymore's nostrils so that the mouth can open so it can steal her breath. The troll itself, by the way, is horrifying looking and wonderful. Designed by Carlo Rambaldi, who was Dino De Laurentiis' go-to effects guy, worked on the giant King Kong back in the day. He would eventually create the horrifyingly terrible werewolves for Silver Bullet, another Dino De Laurentiis production of a Stephen King novel. But he's probably most remembered for designing E.T.
And that's his legacy right there.
And he's done great work here. The troll itself is very expressive. The mouth they have, it's like it opens 4 ways, like it opens on both sides. And I think had they edited a little bit better, we would have believed it entirely. But they always linger just a moment too long, so you get an idea that it's an animatronic.
Yeah, it gives you time to really scrutinize the facial features, and you can almost see the mechanisms behind the mouth operating. So instead of believing that it's a living creature, you're right. But I, in fairness, I suppose audiences in 1985 don't have the ability to pause it and rewind it, and really. So maybe if you're seeing it for the first time, that the suspension of disbelief is more powerful. But it is a great design for the creature, and there's also like a lot of interesting sound work, because as it's running around, it's making all of these almost gleeful sounds. It all works. That part of it really works for me. The fact that it's such a mysterious, somewhat whimsical, but completely scary creature at the same time.
Who's that voice, HB?
You're going to tell me it's Howie Mandel or something?
Frank Welker.
Frank? No kidding, really?
The mighty, mighty Frank Welker. Dr. Claw, yes. Megatron, that's him. Also the troll here. Also, if you heard a bird in any television show or any movie, and that bird said anything from, say, 1970 to the present, Frank Welker was doing that bird.
I was convinced, because of the E.T. connection, that it was going to be Howie Mandel or somebody like that.
That would be great.
Deborah.
Oh, that good old Frank Welker, and a good voice. They occasionally lapse into, like, ain't it cute, cutesy, kind of like, oh, kind of stuff. But other than that, this thing is purely out of a nightmare. That's the thing, like, the disparity between the first 2 segments and this segment is kind of something you can't overcome. But this segment is a perfect nightmare. It's like it's a really great children's nightmare of a story, where your parents don't trust you, and they're trying to actively suppress the thing that's going to help you. They really ultimately don't believe you, and this menace is real. I don't know. I really love the segment. Actually, it's just not in keeping with what we were previously given.
I mean, that's fair. I think it was maybe a bridge too far for myself, because the previous 2 segments were so solid. It was a little bit of a letdown, and but at the same time, it was nice finally that General had his his or its moment in the sun, because as you said, in the second episode, particularly, General has nothing to do. It's almost like General disappears from the movie in a sense. So, but we've seen these hints of what he's chasing. So we're ready and we want to see what this is going to lead up to. And I think it does a pretty good job of giving us the payoff that we were looking for.
I think maybe had they just included that troll throughout, that the cat was always one step behind it, like it was always one step ahead. I think that could have alleviated some of that problem and some finesse of making these stories. I think from what I understand, initially there was to be a fourth story. And if they had had a fourth story that was supernatural, sort of sandwiched in between the two very realistic stories, because it's kind of like Goodfellas, Casino, Hugo, as far as the order of the tales. But had it been, not supernatural, not supernatural, supernatural, it could have been a nice cushion and it wouldn't have been so jarring when we get to the end. Nevertheless, love that troll. Love this story. Love his tiny arm and all the gore in that fan. By the way,
the gore.
If your
Sorry,
box fan is spinning that fast in your child's room, remove it from your child's room.
Yeah, that sequence where the troll finally gets its comeuppance, I couldn't help but be reminded of Gremlins, because it had the same dichotomy of what's essentially kind of not a children's fable in Gremlins' case, but there's a lot of cutesy, fun stuff happening. But then in the midst of that, you'll have a gremlin that gets exploded in a microwave or something really gory and kind of gross. And that's essentially what happens to the troll. It gets thrown into the fan. And fortunately, so at that point, the parents finally, because the troll has kind of kicked the doorstop under the door to keep them from coming in. And eventually they were able to come in. And you're still kind of thinking, well, they're not going to believe the daughter because, she's trying to protect the cat or whatever. But that's the evidence that the parents need to realize that the daughter was telling the truth. And the father finds the little knife that the troll is brandishing, and there's a severed hand there. And there's just guts kind of still rolling around in the box fan. That was actually, like I said, it's a PG-13 movie, but there's spikes of thematic sort of danger and in this case, gore, which I thought was really welcome for me.
Is it any wonder that Halloween has become really the most popular holiday in America, considering there was a time when an entire generation were left to their own devices to watch cable television, and this is what we watched over and over and over again?
It's true. And this was the heyday of that, because it was always, it kind of, in a way, it's kind of like the menace lurking beneath the suburbs, right? That's what you had with a movie like I keep referencing Poltergeist, but it was such a heavy thematic thread through a lot of these movies. But Gremlins, obviously, it's a whole sleepy, friendly town in the middle of sort of Rockwell's America that gets turned upside down by the presence of these gremlins. Yeah, and who were we at the time, if not just kids living in those suburbs, living that reality? And it's sort of like if you were living through like the Red Scare and you're watching all these movies like The Blob and all these movies in the 50s that are commenting on your circumstance, but in an interesting and kind of a way that doesn't hit you over the head with the themes. They're good movies, but they have a lot to say about the circumstance you're living through. And not to get too over the top with this, but I think that's part of the tradition of a movie like Cat's Eye, in particular, that final segment.
Well, it certainly was what was on my mind in the 1980s. My greatest fears were ledges, rabid dogs, trolls, tiny trolls that live in my wall. The effect, by the way, it should be noted that the effect of the wall splitting open and opening up and then sealing itself afterwards is magnificent. Whoever's doing practical effects here was doing really, really good work. It's the optical effects that were troubling.
It was cool because it's clearly they broke open this wall, this hole, but then they just ran it in reverse, so it kind of gets sucked closed. But I'm actually, this reminds me, one of the things that I actually found a little bit kind of a little scary that I didn't notice the first time that I watched this movie, the last time I watched it, is after the parents come in and they've saved child, I had this thought that the father then articulates, and he says to the daughter, "Well, have you seen any? Does he have any friends? Have you seen any more of them?" And I could not help thinking, what if there's a whole race of these trolls like living in this poor girl's like wall? There's some the uncertainty of that really kind of got to me a little bit.
Here's the thing. I think Stephen King, while they were making Firestarter, was toying with the idea of a little boy who's being pursued by this troll and was thinking about turning it into a screenplay or a novel or something. And at the same time, Dino De Laurentiis said, "I need a vehicle for the Drew Barrymore." And he went, "Oh, I got it. Let's do it." Because this story, even though it doesn't fit in with the other two, has such goddamn promise. It could have been a feature. I would like to know more about what was going on with this cat and the troll and this weird psychic connection. What's going on here? Why they've been stealing breath? They've been apparently doing it for centuries, that there are old folk tales about them.
Yeah, and there was something in the character of the troll that automatically kind of put me in the mindset of a movie that came long after. It might have been 86, actually, maybe not long after. But do you remember there was a movie called The Gate?
Oh, yes.
Which is a movie that I actually saw in the movies. True story. I went to the movies and I tried to go to see Lethal Weapon, but they wouldn't let us into Lethal Weapon because we were too young. It was an R-rated movie and we weren't yet old enough to see it. So our fallback was a movie called The Gate, which I don't remember a ton about The Gate, but it essentially involved like a race of small troll-like creatures that emerge from a hole in this suburban house's backyard, right?
Yes.
And I have, and just from
a gate, if you will.
yes, the titular gate. And I think the creatures in this case were more like claymation. Like I don't think, but well done.
Well, here's the thing. The thing you're thinking of, at one point, this zombie janitor character falls forward and his body and like just bursts into these little creatures. It's a seamless effect. And then the way the creatures are running around is so flawless. You can't believe how good the stop motion is. But what it actually is what they did here. They scaled up a room and they have a bunch of people in little rubber suits running around. So there is some claymation going on. There is some stop motion animation going on, but there's also a good mixture of rubber suit work.
Yeah, it was well done. But something about those demonic creatures, these small little troll-like creatures, I think kind of is echoed a little bit in this segment of the trolls. There was also, what was the movie? Was it Critters? That was another movie that had a similar type of creature, which was another popular movie at the time that I saw. So
after Gremlins, all bets were off. You were going to be pursued by a tiny monster. This segment may have been, was the girl imagining it? You know, the fact that we're given the evidence of the troll at the end, does that rob the story of anything? I'm thinking about Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, right?
I was just about to say that.
In the original William Shatner Nightmare at 20,000 Feet by Richard Matheson on The Twilight Zone, this is a character who has had a mental breakdown and is getting out of the asylum and is flying home. And so the idea is maybe he's just had a break from reality and is imagining this gremlin. Right down to the ending, there's never any evidence of anything. At the end, it's just he knows that there was a gremlin. In the remake, for Twilight Zone, the movie, the George Miller segment, which is in a lot of ways superior to the original one, there is no doubt there was a gremlin on the wing of that plane. At the end, the wing is completely scarred and there's like talon marks everywhere. The engines have been ripped apart. They weren't hit by lightning or anything. So I'm wondering if that's the same effect here.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. Once you made the case for maybe it's all in her mind, that is, to me, that's the best example of that. And in the movie case, like you said, it leaves no doubt that Yeah, there was a gremlin on the wing of the plane, and this guy probably saved a lot of lives by getting, scaring it off or what have you. I always found that a little bit sort of sad about the ending of that because he's being taken away and I think he's in a straitjacket, and everybody through the whole sequence has just been coming down on this guy because he's such a nuisance. But he really did a service to the whole plane. I mean, he saved them, and this is what he gets. But I always hoped that maybe once the guy reveals to his superior, hey, you got to look at this wing, that maybe the guy might not have to go to the asylum for the rest of his life, but probably not.
He's not going to get to the asylum. Dan Aykroyd is driving the fucking ambulance. He's about to be murdered.
Oh, that's true. Want to see something really scary? I forgot about that. I forgot Albert Brooks is in that movie at the very beginning, too.
That's right.
He's the first guy to get murdered. Yeah.
Playing Belushi's part.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, that's true. That is true, too.
Yeah, so here we are at the end of this. Now, we're given a stinger here at the end. We've been told cats can steal breath, and we see our cat slowly approach Drew Barrymore, but it just loves her. It's a happy ending. Dino De Laurentiis, Drew Barrymore, Stephen King, y'all. This has been Cats. Final thoughts, HP.
Final thought is, I hadn't seen this movie in forever, and it was a very, very pleasant experience to watch it again. I saw a lot of things, noticed a lot of things that I didn't as a child, which should be no surprise, but I really enjoyed it. I was happy to have reacquainted myself with Cat's Eye. How about yourself, Father Malone?
I think it's solid. I think it holds up. I think I feel a lot of nostalgia when I watch it because I remember watching it a lot as a kid. Like I said, I saw this in the theater, like gleefully getting to see Stephen King on my own in a theater. It was just a joy. And I think the stories each hold up individually. I don't know that it holds up overall as an anthology film as far as working on a theme, but it doesn't matter because each of the segments works so goddamn well. All of the performances are really good. The writing is really good. Stephen King adapting himself. I love it. And enjoyable, even though, some of the call outs to himself are a bit embarrassing. But either way, this has been a very special bonus episode of Midnight Viewing. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Particularly, I want to thank Mr. HP. HP, when you're not here dissecting the horror anthologies, like I said, this is your favorite of all time. You confided that to me. Where can people find you?
So you can find me. I co-host a podcast about the TV show Taxi. It's called Night Mr. Walters, a Taxi podcast. And my co-host is my esteemed colleague that I've been talking Cat's Eye with this whole time. I also co-host a music podcast called Noise Junkies. I do that with Father Malone and Mondo Heather's Heather Drain. Any music nerds, please check that out. I also have a Bandcamp site called hpmusicplace.bandcamp.com. So please check that out if you so desire.
As for me, if you want to hear any of my other stuff, go to weirdingwaymedia.com. You can hear, this show, but you can also hear Dark Destinations, a radio drama that I write and produce. Until next time, try to enjoy the daylight. Midnight Viewing, the horror anthology podcast, is a proud member of Weirding Way Media. Our theme song was composed by HP with an assist from Donald Rubenstein and Erica Lindsay. If you want to hear these episodes early and commercial-free, become a patron over at patreon.com/Father Malone. Not only are the episodes up early, but we have extended interviews and bonus podcasts where we spotlight the best episodes of horror anthologies from every series. But if you just like the show and want to help, please share it with your friends and give us a rating on your favorite podcatcher. Together we'll keep journeying through the places that are just as real, but not as brightly lit.